Hi, everybody, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Last of Us, and we know we are thrilled to have The Last of Us back on our screens. New season, new year, apparently, and it has been a minute, many, many minutes. Even though Joel's watch is broken, even he could tell that it's been a little over 2 years since we have last seen Joel and Ellie. And it's going to be even more time on screen as well. We are 5 years later. We are 5 years angstier. And even though we are in a new environment and it seems like, we've nestled into a permanent home for the survivors of this apocalypse, of course, there are many threats coming in both from outside and within. And I'm so thrilled to break this all down each and every week here on Sunday nights with somebody who joined me alongside this journey in true partnership fashion on season one recaps. And I would say a partnership, dare I say, as, you know, motley and as formidable as the one and only Curtis and Viper. It is Grace Leeder. Grace, are you more of a Curtis or more of a Viper?
I think I'll be Viper in this scenario. Mike, thanks for letting me move into the garage. That's great. I appreciate that. And you make me have dinner with you every night. So
Yeah, I will say you may
Mhm.
want to put like a little bit more insulation in there because
Mhm.
you are podcasting from a garage. And
Uh-huh.
I done it a couple times with Jordan Parhar, and he was like
Yeah.
bundled up like nothing, no one's business. And considering the
Yeah.
fact that these people are holed up in Jackson, Wyoming, in the dead ass middle of winter,
Yeah.
listen, The Last of Us is all about a show, but not only spreading the love, but loving yourself. And Grace, you
Yes.
should invest in self love. You can rip up all of my Curtis and Viper posters
Okay.
and use them as makeshift installation.
Put them up. Okay, great. Yeah, a winter in Jackson is about the same as Canada all year round, I think. So, yeah, we're here. I'm very excited. I thought so it's very exciting. It's very exciting. First of all, the show looks beautiful, so it's
Mhm.
just the visuals of this thing.
Even in its
Um,
ugliness, it looks beautiful.
I know. So this show looks disgusting at times as well. We'll talk about some of the moments that I literally went, ugh. um, but glad to be back, even if things don't seem to be on the best of terms between Ellie and Joel. I'm glad that we're on the best of terms here, you and I, Mike, to talk about The Last of Us, as well as all the other coverage we're going to be doing here on We Know Scripted TV.
Yeah, so let's just tease that a little bit because if you missed our kickoff show, first off, how dare you? Second
Yeah.
off, we forgive you. Again, that's the concept of love. But Sunday night, as soon as the episode ends, Grace and I will try as quickly as possible to record our thoughts on the episode immediately, get them out here in your eyes and ears, and then Grace, 1 to 2 days later, you'll be talking about things from more of an adaptation perspective alongside the great Taran Armstrong on the video game pod. Can you have a little bit of a tease based on this first episode? Are we already diverging immensely from the game content?
There are. I actually think that the changes so far are pretty small for the most part. And actually, there's a scenes that seem like shot for shot remakes from the game in the
Ooh.
episode. So Tara and I will break that down. There are changes that I feel like are sort of hinted at and talked about that I think we'll be interested in how that affects things moving forward. The thing I'll say about Video Game Club is you don't have to have played the video game to come and enjoy Video Game Club. And essentially, we break that podcast down into two separate parts. The first part is talking about the things that you saw on the television show and how those might be the same or different from the video games, and just providing some of that context. But we are not spoiling in the first part anything to come. Then we'll do a little bit of a break, and when we come back, that's when we are probably more in the sphere of like, you'll probably either want to have played The Last of Us Part 2, or you don't mind being spoiled on what is to come, because we'll do the spoiling as to how those changes, like I said, might impact things that are coming in the future. So that's how the Video Game Club is broken down. You do not have to be a Video Game Club to, especially in particular, to enjoy the first part of that podcast. So come and join us over on Video Game Club. But for now, you and I are here, Mike, to talk about episode 1.
Exactly. So make sure you don't miss a second of any of the coverage we have going on. Who knows? Depending on how this season goes, we might bring in some other guests from time to time for special podcasts. So we know Scripted TV to make sure you're subscribed to our audio version. And of course, you can also go there to make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel where you can see any visuals, any videos of what we've got going on. Because to your point, Grace, this is a very visual show. And so, whatever the medium might be, we are here to provide you all of our thoughts on The Last of Us Season 2. And suffice it to say, there will be a lot of them because it was a big premiere here. And look, this is something, Grace, that you and I will talk about in a little over a week's time when Andor, another highly
Mm.
anticipated show from 2022 2023, returns for its second season on Disney Plus. But much like we see in the premiere of The Last of Us, we know that it is going to utilize a very significant time jump. And that is always, from my perspective, such a difficult needle to thread, much like the needle and thread that Ellie will use to sew up her bite cover up,
Mhm.
especially in a premiere, because essentially what you have to accomplish in using this mechanism is, okay, establishing what the new normal is between new location, most likely new characters, and then also what the status of our current characters are. But you also have to allude to the past, but not in a way that makes it feel so lampshady and handholdy of like, oh, I remember 2 years ago when the audience did not see when this happened, but I did, and it informed everything that we do moving forward. And I think this episode proved that there are ways to do that. We can certainly talk about one thing that Joel apparently did in the intervening 5 years that has gotten him in a lot of hot water with his therapist, as an example. But, you still want to keep that door open as much as Ellie keeps the door closed for Joel in wanting to allude to these events without making it so explicit as to, okay, yeah, here's all the stuff you missed, and then we're just skipping ahead. And so I think that this set up a really nice way to check back in on these characters, how they are different and how they are the same from, again, this really massive thing that Joel did at the end of season one. We got to, find out about a bunch of new characters. I would say mainly one or two new characters that I'm really, really excited about. And Grace, like any good first step of the hero's journey, right? It's this idea that once we have a baseline established as to what quote unquote normal life is like in Jackson, now we're already going to start to shake that up a little bit towards the end with things coming from outside and inside that will be a threat to our main characters.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly, pilots notoriously like have a lot of setup work to do, and I think over the years we've watched enough TV to know that sometimes they're done extremely well, sometimes they're not done as well. I feel like this is not a pilot; it is the premiere episode of a second season, but because of the time jump, you sort of end up being in a similar situation where there's a lot of setup to do. So we have to set up that Joel and Ellie are living in Jackson, that the two of them have sort of like, it's 5 years later, and that the two of them, what is their relationship like? Who are the other people that they are sort of involved with, and who they have relationships with in this settlement, and anything else that we sort of want to present and kick off for the show. I do think that like I actually think I quite like the episode and thought it was quite good, and yet also feel like there's a tinge of like we waited so long for something, and I'm really trying to like turn off the part of my brain that says like you have to have like propulsive action in episode one,
But
because
Grace, if you turn upon part of your brain, you're no better than the zombies.
that's right. That's right. But I yeah, there's a thing that's happening, and actually there's a television show that started that Taran and I are going to talk about on the Tastebreakers that I feel like sort of falls into this trap, this like very tropey thing of having this thing at the beginning of the episode that's like, hey, and then it, wow, what a thing, and then it cuts back, and then we're gonna see how we get there, and I'm gonna complain about that. I didn't like that actually,
Yeah,
and
media
so
res.
yes, so I actually feel like I want to just sort of be glad that we are back in this world, that and I, being somebody, there was a lot of this that I think I felt in season one, and maybe not this show as much as maybe other shows, where if you sort of know the source material that's being adapted for, you sort of do have this level of trust. Interestingly, this is a video game that Taran and I will talk about. The second game is quite more polarizing than the first game, and so I'm sure that is going to and probably has already influenced some of the decision making that they made going into the show. I have a little bit more trust, I think, in where things are going compared to maybe I'm really interested to see what the reaction to this episode is from a more casual viewer who is going in much more blind than you and I and Taran are. For the most part, I do think this episode was quite good actually, and I think sets up a lot of things that I think I'm quite interested to chat with you about, Mike, today.
Yeah, so let's talk about this episode primarily through, I would say, the pillars of our two main characters and the life that they occupy in Jackson. Obviously, I think as we talk about the end of the episode, we can sort of loop back to where things begin and talk about the introduction of Abby and her crew and the role that she is going to play as she encroaches upon Jackson. But I really want to start with Ellie because just to be cards up here, HBO has not provided a lot to the media in terms of, things to watch or content to allude to ahead of time. The
Yep.
small scotias that I have taken in, and Grace, the small reviews have said that this is going to be a very Ellie forward season. And that we see this even from the get go. That I think if people were hoping for like more Joel and Ellie banter on the road together, you're not necessarily going to get that in multiple ways. Not only are they right now cordoned off into one specific area, but their relationship is quite on the rocks. And to your earlier point, I'm going to be very intrigued to see how people react to Ellie in this episode in particular, because she is 5 years older. She is 19 years old. And good Lord, if any of us remembered where we were at 19 years old, let alone in a zombie apocalypse, like I was an asshole even when I had that cushy lifestyle. I didn't have to worry about, blind zombies ripping my face off as a possibility every single day. But Ellie is in her feels, to basically make it an understatement. And unfortunately, it has led to a bit of a schism between the two of them, to Joel's chagrin.
Yeah, I mean the previously on the first thing we see is the question that Ellie asked Joel at the end of season 1, which is like, tell me what happened. Like what happened in there? And he said, he lies to her. And I think that to some degree that's a very interesting moment, because Joel,
Yeah.
for the majority of season 1, is he's a hero. He's an emotionally detached hero. There are these ways in which he's quite annoyed by the presence of Ellie, much more than it is that he is, sort of taken with her immediately. But his love for her grows immensely over the course of season 1, and ultimately sort of ends up with being what's maybe one of my favorite moments in television history. Mike, I'm just gonna say, is this conversation about what sort of kept Joel alive.
Yeah.
And she says it's time, and he says it's not time that did it. And that scene has just like, it's like seared into my
Ugh.
brain. It's so good. And it's hard, I think, to come back, and they're not only they're living in the same community and they're close in proximity, but they are physically separated. Joel is in the house and Ellie is in the garage. And this thing of Joel Joel was very frustrating to me this episode, in the best way possible, in the way that I just want these two. They're not kids, and they're actually, neither of them are kids. I was gonna say one of them is a kid. Neither of them are kids.
Both, I mean, you say like both legally they're adults, but like, what is legality now in
Yeah.
the post-apocalyptic world?
Yes. So, this tension between them, and you just want Joel to like, and something has happened here. We don't yet know like what Ellie knows. We don't. They're not talking. They're not communicating, and so Ellie seems to be distant, and that could just be this sense of this complicated relationship that the two of them have. That she is that I think Gail, who I'm very excited to talk about, sort of
Yeah.
echoes this point of like, you have the most boring problem in the world. You basically have a teenage daughter, a young adult who isn't interested in you. And he feels like, I feel like there's such an entitlement to Joel that I both definitely understand, and I'm also incredibly frustrated with him in this episode, Mike.
Yeah, and I think that, something that is really taken away from Ellie's dynamic in this episode is that it is largely a Joel problem, but it's not only a Joel problem. And this is something we've known about Ellie for a long time, is that it's tough to say that like she has a problem with authority, but she is
Mm,
somebody where if somebody
she
tells
does.
her to do
Yeah.
something and she doesn't agree with it, she will push back against
Yeah.
it. I mean, remember, this is the person that like basically almost got kicked out of Fedra school back
Right.
in the flashback episode we saw in season 1. So it only makes sense that like, while it's nice to settle down and live in a house rather than like living off of cans of beans on the road,
Yeah.
this doesn't seem like a natural environment for her. Specifically this idea of, okay, now as part of a community, you have to do your part and you have to be part of the patrol. I mean, we'll talk about Dina certainly maybe serving as an enabler to her in many ways, but like all these people know kind of what they're in for 5 years later when it's like, all right, Ellie is part of the patrol, but we know that she's just going to walk off on her own if she feels like she'd rather do that than listen to us at all.
Also, earlier you said Fedra school, and in my brain I went to Phaedra school, which I just,
Lord, not Ellie Sue.
just a school being like, I do too much because you do too little. It's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. So Dina is an interesting. We said to talk about Dina, but also I think it is interesting in terms of talking about this being an Ellie forward season. But we do start with Joel, and we do start with him. He's working, and Dina comes to visit him. And this is Taran and I will talk about this. This isn't really a relationship that exists in the show in terms of like how close Joel and Dina seem to be. And I do really like it because it's obviously we'll see how Dina is connected to Ellie, and then how sort of like that, like it just feels like more complete. But there's this also really interesting thing of this idea of Dina's representing the thing that Joel actually wants with Ellie, right? Of like, I think he says this in therapy that it's like there's a little bit of like, she's acting like how he thinks a daughter should act. The other piece of this that I think is really important that I haven't mentioned yet is like we should also, I'm actually surprised it was not in the previously on, which is we should not forget that Joel lost his daughter
Yes.
at the beginning of this.
Considering that, yeah, he does say, like, essentially with that conversation with Dina, like, I don't know what's happening. She's 19. We're both kind of doing this for the first time, reminding us that he did have a daughter and he lost her when she was what, like 13,
13,
14 years?
14, yeah, something like that. So I think that if you take Joel as this like this hardened man who repelled any sort of emotion and love and was not willing to let his heart break again until the moment where he found himself that he did open up, and now he feels like he let it happen to himself, I think. And this idea, I think Dina sort of in here is representing like this extra bit of like this is what my relationship could be like. And I
Yeah.
think Joel, the therapy talk is so interesting because he says this thing. It's so funny that Dina clocks it as like therapy talk,
Yep.
because it is so therapy talk coded. But he's essentially saying like I can't control other people's actions. But
Yeah, he
Joel, the
says
whole
it
thing,
says very specifically, I can't hold myself responsible for another person's emotional state, which does feel like the book jacket quote on like Gale's tell-all in a different universe.
I also wonder whether he like misinterprets a little bit of what, because he's not being truthful with Gale either, and so he is kind of responsible for her emotional state because he caused this rift to happen again, whether or not we
And
know
and
that
not
that's what
to
Ellie knows. But
and
yeah,
yeah, and not to mention, what also colors a lot of this with Joel that will lead to his final line of dialogue in this scene with Gale is the fact that like the whole first part of that phrase, I can't hold myself responsible, that is like Joel's eternal struggle, right?
yes,
Is that he is somebody who has lived for years with the understandable weight and guilt of his daughter's death. He is the one here who is obviously living with this huge, massive secret of what he did to the Fireflies, just because, as he would say himself admit at one time, like out of pure selfishness of like, I could not let her go.
yep,
I could not let her die. I couldn't let that happen again. And so I low key damned humanity, maybe by not allowing a vaccine to possibly be discovered. And so the fact that Joel is trying to talk this mantra into myself of like, I can't hold myself responsible for other people's emotions. It's yet another, to Gale's point, lie that he's probably telling himself
yeah.
because he just can't help but do that.
Yeah, and I think you can see this not only in the way. So he has to believe that he did the right thing, right? Like to keep Ellie alive, because if they had killed her and then found a cure, like yeah, they wouldn't be stuck in Jackson. Maybe it's been 5 years
Yes.
later. Like there's this extra little thing that I really like about the story, which is that he's also become a quite important member of this community in
Right,
Jackson, where we're
which
gonna
is interesting because him and Tommy had done construction prior
right.
to the outbreak happening. So it is sort of this cyclical nature, right? Like almost full circle of, okay, on paper, this is what it was back in 2003
Yeah.
of, oh, all right, Joel is a single dad living with his teenage daughter, working in construction. Theoretically, it's the exact same situation here, but it is far from the same.
But he also has to, I think there's probably some part of him that has to like building and making sure that Jackson is this thing is like in some ways probably like it could, it's probably just his nature, but there's also a bit of like the situation we're in has to be the one that works, like
Yeah.
if I let Ellie die and they would have found a cure, like I didn't let that happen, and so now I'm gonna like make sure that the thing we have, like I'm gonna make sure like this is protected, this thing. So I really like, and I love Maria. This is just like she is excellently cast. I
Oh
want to
yeah,
make
I
sure
love Tina Wesley.
yeah, she is quite excellent, I think, and their conversation that ends up happening. I really like. I thought that they did a pretty good job of like setting this, and I think there's no surprise when you look at. I think if you look at like who are the main cast on this show, I don't know if this has changed, but it's just Joel and Ellie.
Yeah,
Just
there was special guest stars of like Caitlin Dever and Rutina Wesley, which is interesting. I believe that was the case with season
season one.
one as well, but obviously, again, very atypical considering the fact that assumingly we are going to get a lot more of these people as long as we're in Jackson.
Which we will, but I think it's always important to go back to this idea of like the two of them, like this.
Hmm.
So this journey that we basically start the episode on, like we're gonna get a lot of where Joel is set up. Then eventually we're gonna sort of like flip it, and we're gonna see where Ellie is, and then eventually by the end of the episode, we're gonna like sort of like meet in the middle in terms of like what their relationship is like. But I actually do think this is like just thematically, it's so strong in terms of like where Joel is, even if I find him incredibly frustrating in this episode, Mike.
See, that's interesting that you find Joel so frustrating in this episode because I personally found Ellie more frustrating. So there's these fun different angles we're kind of coming in
You're
with.
you're a father.
Yes.
I am not a parent.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean that could be it. I mean, I think it's largely for me the impudence of Ellie and this idea that like basically every single order she's given by every single person. Hell, the
Yes.
first thing we see in the time jump is her wrestling this big bear of a man
Yes,
before we
that's
actually see
right.
the bear, and you have young Mazzino Jesse being like, "Okay, stop, stop, stop," and she's like, "Nope, not gonna stop at all." Like
What did she
she
say? I got the first. What did she say? She didn't get the first blow. What did she say? Where she's like bragging, and he's like, "You got punched in the face." She's like, "Yeah, but
yeah.
I took the punch."
Boo mother effer is
Oh
her
yeah,
calling
boom,
card here, and so
boom, mother F.
yeah, and it is. And again, it's not to say that like it's any bad writing for the character. Like I think it's very understandable, not only given Ellie's age, but the environment that she's in, and the fact that this isn't natural for her. And it's also very interesting to get a glimpse into the clear discomfort that she feels with the entire situation, especially knowing that like she has to keep this secret. Why we will see again,
Yeah.
as I mentioned before, that she gets bit and basically is like, well, shit, I guess I have to scar myself and sew myself back up to make sure that nobody knows my secret. But she does have a big source of comfort, which I really loved in the form of Dina. We obviously, due to circumstances, did not explore a lot of Ellie's romantic prospects in the
We,
present of season one. We
we
had
did
the
get a
flash.
flashback.
We got
Yeah.
well, that's what I meant. We got the
Yeah.
flashback with in that Left Behind episode,
Yep.
but that clearly scarred her in many ways to be like, okay, this is how my view of love is possibly skewed in lieu of the past. And so it was really sweet to watch her really harbor this crush towards Dina for the moments, even when like Dina's adjusting her holster, and to have Ellie clearly harbor something that she thought was very unrequited given everything that's going on with Jesse, only for her to be quite literally warmly received by the end of it.
Yeah, it's I like it a lot. I think that to just reverse a little bit back on like Ellie's confrontational nature. This is a person who really has not been in control of their life, being in Fedra school, being shepherded, across the country with Joel. Like I think that it's very reasonable to think that she is looking for these moments where she can sort of buck authority. She's gonna go training with Tommy. Interesting, like Tommy does not admit to Joel that he was with Ellie. He
Yeah,
says he was just training himself.
and I really like that dynamic as well. And we got a little bit of this in season one when they make a brief stop in Jackson, right? Where Ellie kind
Yep.
of like uses Tommy for Joel advice of like,
Right.
is he always like this? Because Tommy was the younger brother, but Joel was kind of like his brother's keeper in a manner of speaking, in that he always felt like Tommy was the screw up. And so
Mhm.
she's able to confide in him as to like, how do I necessarily deal with this? And Tommy's able to talk from his own personal experience of like, sometimes you just got to do a not very Ellie thing and just go along with it because it's a lot easier than arguing with him in circles.
Yeah, I think what this episode does is not unlike Fungus, Mike. I think they make a lot of really good touch points between. There's a
Hmm.
lot. The network here is really strong because you have this Tommy and Ellie scene, but then Tommy's going to go back and he's going to talk with Joel, and Maria's there, and Joel has this very cute relationship with Tommy and Reese Kid. It's very cute. And then you also have with Dina and Ellie, you have the fact that Ellie was with Kat for a bit. Dina has broken up with Jesse, seems like for, maybe again. So it's all very like interconnected in a way that I think is actually like very good for building the foundation probably of what is to come. Like we're setting up a whole, like really season one. Again, I want to make sure we acknowledge that like this will be like sort of a Joel and this is a Joel and Ellie story at the same time. They've done a good job of, now that we're in a new environment. Last season was them traveling through the country. We often got like people coming in and out, which they now have a home base this season in the form of Jackson, and that is an important thing that we established. I think they do a pretty good job this episode of doing that. Also, Jackson looks incredible. Like I don't want to live there because outside of the walls, as the boy says, there are monsters and you have to
Yeah.
kill and shoot them. But otherwise, I like to vacation in Jackson. Circa our own
Yeah,
time.
come in for their New Year's Eve party. It seems like it's beautifully decorated. Loved me a jug band. There's only like one homophobe in town, evidently.
Yeah, he got beat up anyway. So
Sort of.
yeah,
He got pushed down to the
yeah,
ground.
true. So yeah, Dina and Ellie, I think that they're very cute. I think the chemistry between Isabel Merced and Bella Ramsey is very good through this first episode. Dina knows how to get to Ellie's heart with a bad pun.
Which
With
I
few of them.
loved. Such a great callback to Ellie finding the joke book near the
Yep.
end of season one. Obviously, a bigger symbol in the game as well, more of a runner, but still shows that like these two are more alike and kind of have that natural chemistry
And,
than
yeah.
maybe even Ellie thought.
Yeah, and Dina has this way in which they actually are very similar, but Dina moves through the world, I think, with less anger
Yes.
than Ellie does, which I think, knowing what we know about Ellie is completely justified and fair. But there is something that I think Ellie sees in the way Dina moves through the world, and the way that she also knows they like the scene. I think the sort of aesthetic of the show. There's so much. I mean, Tara and I will talk about this, but like the way that the truck is positioned on the supermarket, like that's feels so game of like, oh, this truck is perfectly aligned to go through that open window.
Hardcore.
Go up. Yeah, and so they get up. But she says like, we could let the men do we could let the men go in the building. And Dina's like, yeah, right. Takes out her little knife as they're gonna stealth through and encounter what they encounter. But I think that the relationship is very. I like it. I'm a big fan of Ellie and Dina so far. I think
Yeah, I'm shipping them. What do we call them? Deli. Was there a? Yeah.
Aline, yeah, Lena's
I'm
Ellie.
eating it. I'm eating it up.
All right, let's go with Deli. We'll go.
Meat's
with Deli.
on the market. And
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the very intimate conversation they had before their first kiss and then their second kiss, their third kiss, etc. Where, Ellie says, every guy in this room is staring at you right now. And Dina says, maybe they're staring at you. Maybe they're jealous of you. Ellie replies, no reason to be. I'm not a threat. And Dina says, oh, Ellie, I think they should be terrified of you. And this was a large running theme you and I talked about in season one, which is this idea of almost love and violence being two sides of the same coin. That the things we do for love, well, it is an incredibly warm and, almost essential opportunity to welcome people into your heart, to just make you more of a human being. It does come on the other side of like, what would you do for someone that you cared about? And obviously, what Joel did at the end of season one is part and parcel for that. We saw throughout season one all of these partnerships where one person would do something incredibly extreme if it meant protecting either someone they love or someone that they loved. And so here, I thought it was incredibly appropriate and on theme that their language, while again very passionate and very romantically charged, still has this threatening, violent language to it, right? I'm not a threat. Oh, Ellie, I think they should be terrified of you. I just think it did a beautiful callback, Grace, to this idea of even when you're like bantering with your romantic partner, they are still using the term threat, which just inherently ties violence into it.
Well, think about the scene with Joel and his nephew, right? Where, like, think about that it's this sort of like warm, like he's like sitting on his lap, but what they're actually talking about is like, and we kill the monsters, you know? And then when Joel's leaving the room and his nephew like pretends to shoot him and Joel pretends to die, like violence. And I think like as you were talking, I was like, oh my God, that scene is like better than it wasn't just cute, it's like thematically on point. So yeah, this way in which, because in this world, like, this is the type of thing that you have to do to protect the people you love. You might have to shoot and kill somebody. You might have to shoot an infected, creature, or you might have to, as we saw in season one, obviously the thing that happens to Ellie sort of horrifically, is it in the diner? Like there's this level of like just how horrific this world in particular is, and sort of amplifies and the violence in this world in relation to doing it for the people you love.
All right, let's get into, we mentioned it before, but really the big Joel moment of the episode, which is this therapy session with Gale. So we knew Catherine O'Hara was coming in as a brand new character
Mhm.
to the canon. I did not expect this. It is a little odd to me to watch Catherine O'Hara say the F word, just because I think, I don't know, even Schitt's Creek, one of her most memorable roles in recent memory, was like still fairly friendly in terms of the curse words
That was a
flying out.
CBC show. My CBC is
That's
our
true.
public broadcast. Never. I don't know if she's dropped an. I'm sure she's dropped an F bomb on Apple TV's The
I would say
Studio
on the
so far,
studio,
but
which I
yeah,
heavily recommend people check
same.
out. But it obviously colors the fact that she is no therapist. First off, she's a psychotherapist, which is
That's right.
quite different. But she has a lot of baggage that she is bringing into this conversation with this particular patient in particular. This is
Well,
no
no, Joel gave the baggage. He gave the bag of weed.
Exactly, the bag of
Mhm.
weed as a nice form of payment here, and she's chasing that with plenty of liquor because it's a tough day for her. Her birthday's New Year's Eve, I guess, as we find out, which is,
Right.
she probably feels overshadowed in many ways every year, and that was before her husband, Eugene, which, I don't know if that's a call out to Eugene Levy or not. If not, it's just very
Oh,
incredible
very
timing.
fun. Yeah, no, that's the name of the character. Gale is not a character from the game, but Eugene is a named character in the game.
Okay.
So yeah,
I mean, that would have been because I believe he'll be played by Joe Pantoliano. As a bit of a
he will
casting
be.
spoiler, but
Yep,
like, God, it would have been incredible if they just cut to like a
that
file
would have been
photo of
amazing.
Eugene leaving. You shot the eyebrows right off of him. But she obviously has a lot of emotional, frustration, sadness, anger
Yeah,
towards this man that she lets loose on him in a way to have him be openly transparent in response. And this is just a great reminder of how freaking incredible Pedro Pascal is as an actor. These close ups, where, for what it's worth, for Gail's unconventional methods, it does seem to work for a brief second, right? Where she is getting him to at least show his vulnerabilities a bit. Like he starts crying, he gets
yeah,
incredibly verklempt, thinking about, like, did you do something to her? What happened?
yeah,
And then when, the conversation develops, you see in one singular shot that emotional vulnerability give way to his typical steely resolve as
yeah.
he my sort of again, like, inner monologue for Joel as that's happening is more so like, all right, keep your wits about you. Remember, you're not supposed to talk about this. Like, she almost got you. She got you right to the precipice, but pull yourself back from the edge. And you see, like, the tears almost suck back up into his face as he then very quickly stands up, ends the session, and just says, I saved her, and walks out.
Yeah, this is really good. I mean, he's not unlike a construction worker. He's just like putting the plaster, putting the drywall.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm building this wall. I don't, yeah. But so as I said, like Gale is a new invention for the show, and this is just really well done. Again, I there's this thing that stuck with me for a while. I was watching a TikTok from an author, and she was giving advice for people who want to write, and she said like write novels, and she said every scene you have should be like hitting the themes of your book. And often people forget as they're going along that like by the end of it, you're like kind of like, yeah, I got to get to this point, this like, but the moments that happen in your show have to hit the themes. And this is a really great way to introduce not just to have Catherine O'Hara on the show, but to have her be connected to Joel as his therapist but also have this reason for being mad, much like Ellie is could be mad at Joel, even though, again, we don't exactly know what the rift is here between Ellie and Joel, but she has reason, but she's still being there, but she's basically being like, listen, I can't really help you if you don't tell me like the truth, and I've done this
Meet
enough
me
to know
halfway.
that I know that you're lying. Like, you're not telling me the full story. And he can't. And there's two reasons he can't. One is because by admitting what he did, the first thing is just from the larger like thing. He might be ostracized because he didn't let there be a cure
Right,
happen, right? Like,
right.
he might be the reason why they're still stuck in there, while presumably her husband, like, there's a chance that he could have survived because he wouldn't have been in a situation like this, even though we're gonna sort of get, like, she does say, like, I know, like,
You had no
you
choice.
had no choice, right? Which I'm
Which
intrigued.
is also very fitting for a character like Joel, right, who makes these very fateful choices as recent as
Right.
last season.
And I want well, that is a really interesting thing. I think we'll probably get more into in the spoiler section of the video game thing, because I think
Mm.
there's a lot there in terms of like that line about like you had no choice is gonna be really interesting to see what happened, and I'm intrigued to see it. But the secondary thing is him personally as a person, this guy who does things because he has no choice. He did have a choice in the hospital of whether or not he would choose to do the thing he did. And if he admits that he actually did something out of selfishness rather than for the good of, whatever, that changes how he sees himself and probably how he thinks people probably perceive him to be. I think this is like an excellent addition here into the show, and I really like this scene.
Well, not to mention when you talk about that quote of "I know you had no choice and I should forgive you," Gale then follows it up by saying, "And I can't
Yeah.
because of how you did it." And
Right.
on the one hand, again, alluding to these enigmatic details that maybe we'll find out as like, "Oh my god, did Joel like torture this guy, Joe Pantoliano, to death? Like, what the hell's going on here?" But on the other hand, it is almost confirming Joel's worst fears, right? Of also admitting to something, which is this worst case scenario of like, what if someone, and especially what if Ellie doesn't forgive me? If
Yeah.
I
Yep.
apologize over and
Yep.
over again, what if things are forever changed and I've just ruined everything by being open? I think it is just such an incredible reflection into the state of Joel in this particular moment where he feels so closed off from Ellie that she is forcibly keeping him out, while at the same time, he is keeping a lot in. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's also a wonder, and again, I'm no psychotherapist, but I'm trying to armchair right here of like, could he be projecting a bit as to like, almost not realizing how similar he and Ellie are in terms of this time metaphorically trying to keep something locked out, locked away. I don't need your help, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, you also wonder whether, like, not that there's probably that many like psychotherapists or even like therapists who might be living in Jackson, but the idea that he keeps going to her is kind of funny. And I think like that could seem really silly. And the fact that like she is is willing to do it, but also I imagine that like there's a thing that people see in Joel. It's the reason why he's picked to go bring Ellie across. That he does have this thing about him that he can make these decisions. He can do things that other people might not be able to do. He is incredibly reliable, and I'm sure Gail sees that that's a reason to try and help this man, even though she's actually the one I think kind of like doing this for the greater good of the community.
Yeah.
She's the
Yeah,
one.
I'm sitting down with my husband's murderer every week because we need him,
Yeah,
And Maria's going to talk about it. That we'll talk about the threats coming in from the outside. I guess one of them is overpopulation. Even is
yeah.
just this idea that like we're taking in all these refugees and we don't have
Oh,
enough housing to do so.
Mike, immigration on The Last of Us.
They
I
already built the wall.
come on. Yeah. So I think, but the other side of that is why Joel would stay in therapy with Gail, simply knowing that she knows is probably he is hoping she forgives him at some point.
Yeah.
He is hoping that like he can sort of maybe make the test case of,
Once you get to know me, you'll be fine.
well, if he can, I think probably there's some sense of like, if I can convince Gail to forgive me, then maybe if Ellie finds out at some point, she'll forgive me as well, except for the fact that the only way he is going to be able to like fix himself and like get better in therapy. Fix is not the right word. It's not actually how I would describe
Right.
therapy. Get some self healing is by admitting what he did, but his refusal to do that is probably the exact thing that is causing so much conflict between him and Ellie. As we see, like in that previous one, it's the first thing that we see is like, tell me the truth, and he says he doesn't. He lies. So yeah,
Yeah, it's this idea of like, again, while my read is that she doesn't know what happened, that this is more so just kind of like teenage, don't be my protector, I can fight for myself type of behavior. For Joel, I also wonder if this is like a bit of a self flagellation of like, this is what you get, dude. Like,
yeah,
you did all of this to protect her, and
yeah.
now she's pushing you out because you made the wrong decision, which is also horrific because the other option in that decision was to let her die.
The decision, to be fair, the decision is not. I think like the decision is sort of. I guess we'd have to go back into the end of episode season 1, and I didn't rewatch it, so I guess by the point that he figures it out, they're gonna kill him if he doesn't let them kill Ellie. I think the big piece of it is like never letting Ellie have agency. That's
Yeah.
like the to
The
probably
the
to
what he
Ellie
what
and
he
Joel.
said was, like, basically, like, it wasn't her choice to make. Like, if
Right,
you remember, his rationale for going after the Fireflies was, like, they didn't tell us the truth. They didn't
right,
give her a choice to do it, and what made it so sticky was that, like, she seemed more than willing to help contribute. Now, I don't know if that would have been to the extent of, like, "Yeah, Ellie, are you willing to sacrifice yourself so that there might
right,
be a chance at a vaccine?" But, again, we talked about this last season, the pure irony of Joel being like, well, she didn't have a choice, so I'm gonna
right.
make sure that she didn't have a choice.
Right. And I think that will be like that's the crux of some of this stuff. And all this to say, like this scene and the way we build up to it and these things are exactly why I'm like really forgiving of any feeling I have of like what do we get? Like what do we go? What are we getting to? Because I feel like they're laying again, to use construction
Aha.
metaphors, they are laying the foundation, even though it might be filled with little fungusy the pipes might be filled with fungus, Mike. I think this is incredibly strong stuff that like feels so thematically rich and sets us up for where we're eventually going.
Well, let's talk about where we're eventually going because, yeah, we've got some interlopers in many different ways. And I guess we'll go in the order of like how they're sort of introduced in the last act of this episode. So let's start with Ellie and Dina's trip outside of Jackson here. As listen, new season, some of these zombies got to get a bit of a glow up. And it seems like we have a bit more of an existential threat to Jackson as a whole
Yeah.
with the discovery of Grace all at Jaws, like the first movie was like, oh my god, it's just a big scary
Yeah.
shark. Now it's like,
Yeah.
oh, they're smarter now. They're intelligent zombies.
Yeah, these are stalkers. These
Ah.
are ones that aren't the noted by the fact that they like sort of haven't fully transformed, and so
Yeah, this one was
are
like giving Antler Queen, the one that bit
yeah.
Ellie with all the tendrils coming from her head.
Oh, through the nose as they like
Ugh.
peer forward is absolutely disgusting. Gross,
More or less
incredible work.
disgusting than how Tess died when that one leaned down
I
on her and it
know.
came out of its mouth.
Yeah, yeah, nothing might be worse than the kiss, the kiss of death from season 1, but still pretty gross. And yeah, so I mean, this is what I'm interested. This is so much of a video game thing of like new game, new forms of infected, and that's like fun because you're like trying to figure out how you're going to do it. We're going to talk about love the throwing the bottle, like
Yeah.
that's such a classic The Last of Us thing that you have to do is throw bricks or bottles as distractions. But this, I'm excited for how they make this impact more mechanically, thematically. We got this thing last season. The time where Ellie goes down in the store and she finds this like infected that's sort of stuck and she slowly kills it. And I think
Yeah.
she's having this thing. There's a lot for that is like in reference to earlier, Mike, about like the violence and sort of her sort of the violent nature maybe in her that's trying to push out and this assertion for control. But I am really interested in like this idea of is there some sentience to these like if the idea is that they are not fully gone, like how do we feel about the fact that we have to fight them, I think is a really interesting thing that the show can play with.
Right, this idea of like, well, these are not just mindless zombies. Like, and we got this a little bit last season with Sam of like,
Right.
oh, when my own brother
Oh yeah.
turns, like, what do I do in that moment? And so Here, I don't think there's going to be like, oh my God, I know this is Brian
Yeah,
from
yeah,
down the
yeah, yeah.
street and he's a zombie now. But there is still this idea of not only the threat of, okay, we just can't easily bang, bang, stab, stab, get out because they're just so, for lack of a better term, dumb. And we can figure out what they're easily driven by, which is usually sound and bloodlust. If they are tactical, not only does that change the game in terms of how we approach keeping out these threats, but also, yeah, there is sort of this overall idea that comes into effect a bit when we talk about things like Fedra, and I'm sure we'll talk about as well with, Abby and the Washington force of like, you know, if you're just operating under the thumb of some megalomaniacal maniac,
Yeah.
aren't you just as bad as the zombies are? Do you have any period of thought to you?
Yeah. So it's very fun. It's the scene was fun of them sort of stalking, well, trying to stalk the stalker. Like,
Exactly. Who stalks the stalkers? But we also see that, to your point, the call's coming a bit from inside the house. And we know that there's this whole like mycelial network that it does kind of function like a communication line. Do we think that's going to be tied into the stalkers? Do we think this is more so going to be kind of like a harbinger for like how the infected eventually break into Jackson? Is that essentially they have some spores on the inside to help them do so?
I almost thought like there was a way in which like I thought this was almost enough to be the last scene of the last image of the episode. It's hunting in a way that obviously we're then, and it probably is better to go with like the people and characters of the show. This is a thing that I think the show does look great, and it can be at times very good in terms of the action set pieces, but really the heart of the show is the character work that we do. And so I think it's the right choice to like sort of like pan up from the spores in the pipes to move to sort of the real end note of the episode. But it's just this thing of like nowhere is really safe. They did build walls, but this is not something that can be contained just by walls alone. And I like it. I think it's very good thematically of not just the idea that it's like this, like the actual danger of this like virus that the fungal the fungal spreading, but also just how like Jackson isn't quite, we see it this whole episode that like the first image like that with like Ellie is in the fight, she opens it up, it's this bright, beautiful, like functioning town, the
Hmm.
settlement that seems safe. Well, actually really there's a lot going on underneath the surface that's maybe not so great. So I like
Yeah,
it.
I mean, that's the thing is that fungus thrives in rot, right? Fungus thrives in death, quite literally in the form of these zombies, but just even from a biological perspective. And so it does make sense, again, thematically, that there's this idea of as much as you can try on the surface to keep up this guise of a normal functioning society, inevitably within all of us, there is this capacity for this like kind of dead, rotten yet living, but ultimately lethal force that is just thrumming underneath the surface. And now we're finally starting to see it kind of bubble about, pop up in a pipe, which obviously is going to have a bit of a bearing on the infrastructure, which is already facing a lot of pressure, as Maria talks about with Joel. So, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a when, not if. And I guess the larger question, Grace, will be which comes to Jackson first, the
Mm.
fungus or the Abbey?
Yeah. I am sure that Taran and I will spend a little bit of time at least on this. In which section I'm yet to sort of see, but yeah,
Porque no
they're
los dos.
tough when you're like, what do you think happens here? And it's like, well, Mike, I played the video game.
Well then let's talk about the past because again, we only
Yes.
get really a sting of Abby at the end. Let's talk about her introduction here. And to your point, we start the episode from where we left off, and part of me is like, why are we doing this only to cut to 5 years later in
Yeah.
about a couple of minutes? And that's because that couple of minutes is filled by putting in the backstory of what will assumingly be, not, if not a main build cast member, at least a big presence in The Last of Us Season 2, which is Abby, played by Caitlin Dever. And we get a little bit in this scene that essentially like, so clarify this for me, Grace.
Yes.
Is she with the Fireflies, or was this group also looking for the Fireflies and happened to stumble upon them after Joel slaughtered all of them?
So I think I can say this. Her dad is like I say this right in the show.
Yeah, you can say that.
Her dad is a surgeon who
I
was
mean,
in
you
the
could say
Firefly
was.
Hospital. Yeah, was in the Firefly Hospital. Who, as she's putting the cross on across, is because he died. So I'd have to I'll have to do a little bit of like my digging in terms of my note in terms of like how connected they, like whether they're like Firefly members or this they're going to talk about the Seattle front. So I assume, yeah, my presumption is that they are Firefly folks who then in the like very first scene are like, hey, I think I have some people up in like Seattle. We could
Yep.
like go. And so they're gonna head there. And in the last scene, it's like they're coming back. So presumably they went to Seattle, been hanging out there for 5 years, now are on their way back.
Oh,
And
they're
so
gonna be
now,
such big hipsters. Like they're gonna
yeah,
be showing up with matcha lattes,
that's right.
beanies,
That's
the
right.
like. They're gonna really
Starbucks.
gentrify Jackson here. And
I
I
hope
will
they're
also
just people from the show Portland. I know they were in Seattle, but just like it's got a bird on it.
yeah, exactly. There's plenty of birds around in the outdoors, and I will say, much like Firefly proper, the force is unceremoniously canceled early on before the
Yeah.
prime of their life.
Yeah. So they are part of a group that we'll learn more about, but the Washington Liberation Front, the WLF, is the group that they are now a part of, and seemingly have come back. I mean, it's no surprise that in that first thing she talks about, not only are they going to get revenge, but that she's going to do it like slowly and gruesomely, and she
Yep.
would like revenge for the death of her father. Abby is a incredibly important character from the game. There was she's there's this thing where I actually think Caitlin Dever looks quite a bit like Abby, but there is a little bit more of like Abby was more of a sort of like a more masculine sort of like thing with that. Like she's a lip more
Mm,
like rougher, like doesn't look quite as like Hollywood conventional as Caitlin Dever does. But I think Caitlin Dever is an incredible actress. I'm
yes.
extremely excited for her to be in this role, in this performance. So excited to see where it goes. And yeah, that's the last scene of like sort of Abby and crew
I
peeking
mean,
over at Jackson.
I'm intrigued. Abby's basic motto is "You f with me, you're
Yeah,
dead." Is her middle
yeah,
name Maria?
that's right. That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
and she is definitely a dragon in the first scene that we get
Uh
because
huh.
again, what's incredibly interesting is that when Joel and a lot of characters again couch the violence that they commit, it is this idea of a greater good, right? Like
Right.
the only reason why Joel probably, well, I don't know. Actually, we talked about this in our season one finale recap that Joel kind of goes into a different mode when he just like he almost goes into video game mode, right? We said when he's just mowing down all of these fireflies.
Yeah.
And so, but you would think that when people do these things, it is for this idea of like, I have to end this life to save somebody else's.
Yeah.
Abby is not in that motto whatsoever. There's actually one of the not Firefly says, like, oh, we had to let Joel go because we were trying to save the wounded, and Abby very tersely replies, but we didn't save anybody, did we? And so,
Right.
what's intriguing is that she has kind of lost out on the altruistic part of violence. That is like, oh, we couldn't save anybody in the midst of letting this person go. So now I'm just in it for revenge. Now I am just in it to exact the violence that this man exacted on me. Pure irony being, if you look back in the season one finale, to that point, Abby was apparently her dad was one of the surgeons that was like in the theater
Yeah.
when, Ellie was about to get operated on. And it was just like bang, bang, he was dead. And so now for Abby, it's not exactly an eye for an eye for her to be like, yes, I want him to suffer. I want him to die slowly because of what he did.
Fun connective tissue between all of this. Not like the bad connective tissue of The Last of Us, which is the fungal infection. But in the video game, Abby is voiced by Laura Bailey, and
Yes.
Laura Bailey in the last scene of like that last episode of episode 1 is one of the nurses in the room who gets I guess I'm saying fun. It is fun. It is fun. So connective tissue there. Laura Bailey, who people would know from Critical Role and other voice acting work. But yeah, I mean, the theme of Abby and Abby's storyline is going to be her hunt for revenge. And this is a story we've seen countless times in media before of like, is it worth it? Is revenge, if that is the sole thing on your mind, does it actually do you any good? Do you feel better when it happens? What do you lose by trying to go,
Right.
by being so singularly focused on one particular thing? And so yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot of like, where do you open and where do you end? And it's kind of telling that Abby is the first thing we see and the last thing we see in this episode.
The last of us things
Mm,
we see. So that's going to do it for our coverage here of the premiere. Grace, any other stray thoughts, unlike stray bullets, that you have about this premiere of The Last of Us Season 2?
We didn't really talk about the last scene between the last the Joel and Ellie cover of like Ellie and Dina kissing, and then the sort of homophobe, and then Joel fighting, and I love that scene as well. That scene is the one in particular that is a pretty faithful recreation from the video game. Like that whole scene basically plays out much like you see. Very very fun. The music is great. Joel playing the guitar strings are very important
Right.
as
And
well.
I
The
think it's
scene of him,
very symbolic as well, even in the moment of like Joel from Ellie's perspective. And again, this is why it's so fun. It's him intruding into her life of like, oh, don't worry, I can fix those strings, and him not even listening to her, taking the guitar and being like, nope, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. But
I'm gonna
from his
fix it. I'm gonna fix it.
yeah, and from
Literally.
his perspective, he thinks that he is helping her. He still
Yeah.
thinks that he still wants to be in that role of like, she doesn't know what she's doing. I have to be the one to look out for her. And we see it quite literally come to blows in this sequence, in this very public setting where Ellie's about to charge at the homophobe. Joel pushes him down. Ellie, in one sense could have taken it as a sense of gratitude, but for her, it is this idea of, no, once again, he is stepping into my life when I can fight my own battles, trying to essentially dictate what I do. When from Joel's perspective, it's more so, I just want to be in your life to begin with.
Yeah. So very, very good. The other thing is like this is a shorter season. It's 2 episodes shorter this year, 7 episodes as opposed to the 9 from season 1. So it'll be interesting to sort of track that pacing along the way. But I thought this was a very good start. Actually, it's another one where I feel like I enjoyed it more by talking about it. I feel
Agreed.
like this is so deep and rich and thematically resonant. So I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying talking about it with you and everybody who's listening. Please feel free to leave us some comments.
Yes, let us know
On
your
YouTube or
thoughts.
social media.
Yeah, let us know your thoughts about the premiere. I would say, specifically because this is about the show, try to avoid major video
Yes,
game
please.
spoilers, or if you do so, like, tag it out the wazoo, build a veritable
Or
wall.
GM, you could DM me, and then I don't care about, I've
Yeah,
played
but at
it,
least
so
if they're public-facing comments, I would say just respond to the
please.
TV show. But let us know your thoughts about the premiere, especially for those that haven't rewatched the show as well since it went off the air. I'd be intrigued to get your thoughts as to like what you thought about this stop into Jackson. I completely agree that I enjoyed this episode watching it. I still think it did accomplish that very difficult task as a, to your point, kind of like a restart of the show, of setting the scene while also simultaneously bringing us back into the world of these characters, done with aplomb, with fantastic performances. But I'll be intrigued to see what other people say as well. And hopefully you all enjoyed listening to us as much as you and I enjoyed talking about it. We're not going to do plugs every week because we're going to be here every weekend, week out on Sunday nights. But at this moment, Grace Leeder, anything you'd like to plug from what's going on We Know Scripted for you?
Tastemakers, Taran and I say we watch a bunch of TV and tell you what you should and shouldn't watch. We're also doing a bunch of other recaps. Like this point, Wheel of Time is creeping up on its finale episode. We're going to be doing some Andor coverage. So lots happening. I'm writing just like you are, Mike, a little bit on Parade. I even have some Last of Us content that people could go check out if you are a video game player. What to expect in the season. So and I'm on social media at Hi from Grace or at Go from Grace. You can find me around.
Now you can find me at a Mike Bloom type. Something that actually Grace and I very recently did is that while one HBO property begins, another one sunsets as only a few days ago. The Pit finished its very high acclaimed season 1. And so Grace and I got together with the aforementioned Taran Armstrong to break down the entirety of that first season, which all of us absolutely adored. Think about the universe where, the life of the surgeons in that Firefly facility at the end of season 1. That is maybe the life of some of the people aboard the Pit. So very much recommend the show as well as the podcast. Of course, down the hatch, we're encroaching upon the end of season 3 of Battlestar Galactica. And then over on the reality TV side of things, doing some Survivor coverage, Amazing Race coverage. Had a very fun B&B with Adam Chase from Jetlag the Game, which was a very fun crossover episode. Also covering Got to Get Out on the Reality Flash, covering some Australian Survivor news on Reality Flash as well. So it is all happening, but you and I are tuned in right now. We are spreading our spores around Jackson and its surrounding areas as we will continue to talk about The Last of Us Season 2. Again, make sure you do not miss a second of it. Set that veritable egg timer to remind yourself to go to weknowscriptedtv.com to make sure that you are subscribed to our audio version as well as our video version on YouTube as well, to make sure you don't miss our recaps going on, as well as Video Game Club and all the other stuff we might have going on during the course of The Last of Us Season 2. I am so happy to be back covering this show. It was such an honor and a thrill and a Jervis to be able to cover Season 1, one of my favorite shows of the year, and I'm hoping we continue that momentum into 2025, technically 2029 in universe.
That's
Happy
right.
New Year, I
That's
suppose, and with The Last of Us. So we'll be back next week covering episode 2 to see what exactly is going to happen now that we've entered a new year and how much all of these threats are going to have an immediate effect on everything going on in Jackson. But until then, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.